of mindfulness being in it. So now I need to change some of my own talk about whether or not SEL is on the outside or mindfulness is on the outside. But this speaks to us as to what is seen as traditional social emotional learning and perhaps used in our schools and districts as Tier 1 services, whether it be PBIS or behavior intervention or a curriculum like Second Step or Responsive Classroom. This is sort of the framework they've been working in, and this is where we want to try and get them to start speaking. So speak their language and then add ours on top of it. At Erickson, which some of you in Chicago may be familiar, is an early childhood education, graduate school, research center, and then we also implement programming. We've brought this all down to a little bit simpler. We know early childhood education is all about social emotional learning. It's where it's the bedrock. We've been doing it for decades, hundreds of years, if we look at the way Reggio and some of the traditional schools out there have been working. But what we identify as the main goals of the work that we do in classrooms and with our teachers is, are the experiences our children are having fostering their humanity and making them feel like they belong in that classroom? Are we giving them a space that says, that was hard, but I'm okay? So a little bit of a space to challenge and test their skills, but at the same time, if they make a mistake, that's part of how we learn. How'd that work out for you jumping off the table? That I matter. I get to say what I want to do. It's not all scripted and there's no room for any organic expression. When my twins were in preschool, their father had open heart surgery. And we had to go and visit him at the University of Chicago, but he wasn't allowed to come home. And our very sensitive preschool teacher turned the entire classroom into a cardiac unit. So there was a waiting room, and there was a cafeteria where you had to go to eat while Dad was in the procedure. There was an operating room. There was a patient's room. And so they processed that with their peers and then got to come back to their class and go, Daddy got a green light. Because that was the language the doctor used, that he could come home. So they got to experience what was happening in their home in a way that it mattered to the educational environment that they were in. And it was expressed in a way that the teacher knew, I can capture this trauma that these young folk are going through in a way that we can all collectively learn from it. And then finally, investment in the collective. I care. That responsibility, if we go back to relationship skills and social awareness, that this interaction where I just had, where I jumped off the table and landed in the blocks, but also landed on my friend, I need to be able to process that in a way that shows that I care about what's happened to you. Not be pulled out of the room and taken down the hallway because now I need to be isolated because I broke a classroom rule, right? So if Dr. Moreno will be here tomorrow. She's probably going to use this slide as well. This is something that at Erickson we're using this language more than that 5-wheel piece, because these are the things that all of those are really working towards. Is whatever's happened, did I maintain the dignity with myself and my teacher and my peers? And do I still feel like I belong in this space? So someone at my table was talking about loving their children. Might have been you, I think, maybe, perhaps. But when we think, those of us that are in early education spaces know that attachment is a huge part of making it feel like I belong and honoring me as that human being, that person, not a being, not a number, not a chair that gets filled in on the circle block, but a human being. It requires us to both have independence and dependence. And it occurs as an exchange. It goes both ways. So what Dr. Moreno has stressed as we've been continuing to do this work in the classrooms in Chicago Public Schools is this idea of a base and then a safe haven. The base is I can come to you and tell you I made a mistake, and that's okay. And the safe haven is the place where I can go and explore and test some of these boundaries and know that even if I make that mistake, I still belong in my class. And my mistake isn't something that's going to ostracize me from my community. When we think of SEL, we think of it in the capacity of maybe a curriculum or a process that's proactive. We're giving information, we're delivering content. It's cultural and climate-based, so it's going to be developmentally appropriate. The idea is that we want this child to be self-actualized, capable of that independence. We're talking about expressiveness and dispositions. Now, if I get stuck on this, and I focus only on this, it's not so bad. But the idea is that I would find a way to embrace both of these, and I would still think in the realm of SEL when I have to react to something and be mindful about that reaction. I'm still going to address this on an individual level with my students. It's not just going to be universal programming. There's going to be teachable moments where I have to stop and deal with that child one-on-one because of their unique environmental or cultural or individual familial experiences. Yes, I want rules and routines because the world at large is going to expect us to operate in those. And also self-control and self-containment, that I can operate in this space even when I'm under some duress, even when my needs perhaps aren't being met because we're not going to be staying in the art center. We are going to go down the hallway because there's a guest coming to read a book. And I know you want to keep playing in the sandbox, but so helping work through all of that tension. So in an optimal classroom, the division between what would be an SEL practice or pedagogy and behavior guidance / classroom management would be a blur of these two things. That I would have a universal approach to social emotional learning, but as the educator in this space, I would also be flexible enough to know that I might have to fall off that script to deal with this particular instance. There might be circumstances where my lesson plan doesn't mean anything after someone comes into the classroom and is having a meltdown, and now we need to stop and process what's happening in our community so that the children see me modeling the type of skills I want them to display for their own peers and in their own social circles and family. So how many of you work in environments where there's a lot of gray conversation about SEL being important? You're smiling like...
Well, I'm in different schools and it's everywhere.
It's everywhere, exactly. There are a variety of myths that wrap around social and emotional learning. I don't have time. I already have this thing to do. I've got dismissal at this time and I've got this going on. And depending on the age that we work with, we might be going through a diapering episode where everybody's losing it in the bathrooms. I waited until both of my twins were ready to potty train, and it was actually the director of the school who kind of went, Adina, yours will be only not using the potty. And part of my hesitation was because I was afraid. I was a new parent. So then there's also this whole thing about engaging with parents. I don't have time to add more. I've got these 3 families, and I've got this new child, and then this one's a refugee, and this one doesn't speak English. There's compounding needs on us that make social emotional learning feel like it's just an add-on, an additional burden to add to an already rich environment where we feel like we're meeting most of these needs anyway. I can't be every kid's therapist. Sometimes they bring stuff to us that's heavy or triggering from our own experiences. If what they're going through has any taste of something that we experienced as children or we're experiencing as adults taking care of our own children, we're going to lock into this fear mode of, I don't want to go there because it requires me to live some stuff maybe that I don't know about. Or maybe I don't have experience in this space because I'm brand new in the community, the school, the field, and I just don't feel like I'm prepared for it. The parents won't be consistent at home. Helicopter parents, snow plow parents. They've got all kinds of names for parents now that are like clearing the way so that it's not difficult for a child and they never suffer any struggle. But we know struggle is where the growth occurs. So maybe what I'm doing in the classroom isn't what is being practiced at home, and now these mixed messages are going all over the place. Now I'm going to have even more work getting Tommy back on track on Monday because this is not what's been happening at home. And we're going to see this more often than not when our cultural identity does not match that of the students that we're serving. I don't want to tell parents how to raise their children. A number of the facilitators that were working on our project in CPS were not parents. They did not feel like they were experts in parenting because they'd not done it themselves. Or they were parents of a generation before technology, before the access to media where children are being exposed to things that are mentally overwhelming, but yet you're having to start to talk about and process. Before the age of lockdowns in schools, where now suddenly we have these things to deal with. So the idea that, well, I don't know how to tell them to do this because I haven't had this experience myself, and it's really not my space. I'm just the educator, I'm just the caregiver, I'm just the teacher in the school. I'm not that person in their community. There's other people that will help them process what happens at home. not touchy-feely. We're not all touchy-feely. Some of us came into this field, but we're not extroverts. And we're not get down on the ground in the block section. And perhaps that makes us feel like we're not able to access that part of ourselves. I would, moving off my script, say we might need to do some self-reflection about why we're not touchy and feely. Were our emotions suppressed when we should have been fostering and opening up that part of our own experience? My kids are well behaved already. I get this. I go into some schools that are well resourced and have lots of nuclear families and lots of financial support from the extended circle. Doesn't change the fact that kids are kids, and they're all going through their own type of stressors when they move through developmental ages and stages, when they go through some of the things that wouldn't look on the outside like they're traumatic. If I live in a 7-room house and I have a driveway and I've got a maid, so what if my parents are getting divorced? Yeah, it's still a thing. So children, regardless of their environment, are still going to need that. But that school may be running so smoothly, and that classroom may be so smoothly that that child doesn't act that out in that space. But it doesn't mean that compliance is skill building. I'm already doing SEL in my own way. I've got the curriculum. I set aside 30 minutes on Tuesday. We play some nature music. We have emotion words on our board. I'm doing it. Great. But are you doing it in those authentic moments when the teachable moment occurs, or are you only doing it in that slot? Is it embedded into the practice everywhere so that when the child has something go on, they know that they can come to you in that moment and everything will stop and we will be able to process this experience? And is the curriculum or what you're doing the maximum, the minimum, or just getting by to satisfy the checklist from the district that comes by and says, I need to see those objectives up on your wall? Okay? The SEL program can't possibly fit every child's culture, right? Which is why then we need to move beyond that and identify that the more I know the children and the families and the community that I'm working in, the better I'm going to be able to take what is probably already a pretty solid curriculum and take it up a notch. And better serve the circumstances that are happening in my children so that I feel better about those interactions as well. Whatever's going on in our classroom, we take it home with us. We tell our children, we tell our partners. It weighs on us to the point where sometimes we even have maladaptive coping practices to get over some of what was going on in that space. So the better that I can do to continue to build and enhance that practice, the better outcome it's going to be, not just for them, but for my own social and emotional position and competence. This is just the next fad. How many of us have been here in early ed to know that this is not a fad? It was practiced when the kindergartners didn't have 16 standardized tests, when they weren't required to sit and do worksheets because they got to actually play. And we're trying, pushing this back up the mountain to get educators and decision makers and policy practitioners to recognize that what they're doing isn't necessarily making a better student for the elementary grades or a better citizen at the end of the day. If I don't have a chance to play, then I don't practice that, and then I'm able to access it later on. How many of us use play to identify deficiencies in fine motor skills? But if we don't get to cut with scissors, we miss that, and then it shows up later, and the child ends up in an IEP, and then we have all of these extreme diagnoses of children that maybe just needed some time to be children. I love that you're nodding your head. I feel like I've got a choir in my girl here. And finally, just let them play. Kids learn naturally. No. We still want to structure those experiences. We still want to leave in some of this so that there's some intentionality on what the play results in. My court jester, my therapist, refers to manipulating as taking what you got and getting optimal outcomes. So when I needed to potty train my kids, I took what I had and I put the Cheerio in the toilet and I stopped the TV show so the movie stopped and then they could go do this. I manipulated the circumstances. We do the same thing when we're teaching our children to sleep. We do the same thing when we're trying to get our spouses to wash the dishes. We manipulate the circumstances for an optimal outcome. It's not a bad word. But if we take advantage of the play and structure it so they can live out that experience they were having, It's a much richer opportunity for everyone in the room, and we get to know what they may not have thought to tell us. If I hadn't said to the teacher, my husband is having open heart surgery, would she have known to set the classroom up in a way that my sons were excited to come to school rather than nervous about the fact that Daddy had not been home for 3 weeks? Probably not. So if we're bringing mindfulness into our classroom, this is actually a note that was posted eye level in a kindergarten classroom as she was walking out her classroom. A calm classroom starts with a calm teacher. Well, sometimes I'm not calm. I'm still working on my road rage. And if anybody has been in Chicago traffic of late and knows the Jane Byrne thing is still going on, there are times that I'm going to come into this environment and need to be on for my kids, and I'm not. So I need to constantly be reminding myself that I control the temperature in the room. What's going on there is what I'm giving them, what energy I'm expressing. And I love this quote from Emily Stiles. Emily is the co-founder with Peggy McIntosh, for anyone that knows the Invisible Backpack, 50 Things of White Privilege. Okay. So Emily says, half the curriculum walks in the door when the students do. We know every year when we get a new collective of kids, last year's lesson plans may not work. A couple of them might. But we need to be flexible and meet the children that come to us where they are. Now this is from anti-bias and equity education. So when we're thinking of it from a preschool perspective and we're using the frame of anti-bias and equity, we're meeting the children exactly where they are, with the experiences that they're having, because if I don't, what happened to them outside that classroom is still going to come into the room. And it's going to play out in their interactions with their peers. It's going to play out in their ability to be trusting and engage with me. So even if I don't address it, it's going to be there. It's like that, there's a book, Is There a Worry Worrying You? And there's a monster on every page. It's there. What are we doing about it, right? So one of the things that we talk about when we say building a mindful culture in our classroom is how we communicate with our littles. Humans have two kinds of interactions, either connecting or disconnecting. My mother was a hippie. When Barnaby was telling his story, I went up to him and said, I had a slightly different version. My mom took me out of a rural community, put me on a mountain in Colorado, and I lost my last name, and my best friend was from Ecuador and didn't speak English. After what felt like forever but wasn't, they then moved me to an urban environment, and my dad didn't come with us. So this was all completely, every stage of that was foreign, on top of developing through all of those different experiences. But she was really good at listening to me. How'd that work for you? Tell me what you needed. Not getting upset with me or my brother when he unscrewed the thing on the refrigerator door and the door came off. Some parents would have been like, you ruined the refrigerator. My mother's reaction was, what were you trying to accomplish? How did that, where'd you find the tool? I seem to remember that was like really big on the radio. But rather than blaming the child, listening, being curious, being mindful about what we're imposing on that experience and trying to understand where they were. Stimulus, response. Viktor Frankl, The Search of a Man. There's that space inside where we need to pause and do some of this processing ourselves before we react and do some of these disconnecting actions. Encouraging versus threatening. I'm going to take that PS4 away if you don't turn it off right now. Maybe not, maybe it might work in the moment, but not building a sense of accountability or understanding time frames or some of the things that we could do if we, let's find a way that we can work with this differently. I'm going to encourage you to finish that level, and then let's go walk the dog together. After dinner, I want to sit with you, and I want you to show me what your character is doing. Well, now I'm changing the way I'm asking them to pause. I'm not denying something they're passionate about, and I'm actually putting myself in there to find out what's so fascinating about this. Befriending versus rewarding people to control them. This is like Alfie Kohn in here, right? The stickers and the you did what I want, so I'm going to give you something. The world doesn't operate like that. If that's the case, I'd have a brand new car, a lottery ticket, all that good stuff, because I'd be rewarded for being a good person. That's not the way it operates. But befriending them in meeting them where they're, hey, that's kind of exciting. But now that the truck's been taken apart, how am I going to play with it again? Oh, let's put it back together. Let's put it back together. And befriending this curiosity and realizing that you've got a four-year-old engineer in your space, right? Mindful vocabulary. There's two different kinds of interaction we have with our littles. Well, actually, there's two different kinds of interaction we have with everybody. Group and one-on-one. I'm going to publicly praise, and I'm going to privately problem solve. We see a lot of things happen in the classroom where the kid in the very back, the teacher's like, Tommy, if you don't, and it's over the ears of everybody else. I've walked into classrooms in CPS and I've sat down on the rug next to a little boy and said, ooh, I can't wait to make friends with you. My name's Adina, and he'll tell me his name. And before his name can roll off his tongue, someone on the rug will go, oh, you don't want to be friends with him. Because they've already picked up the judgment that's been projected by other people who have publicly shamed rather than privately problem solved. So it's important for me to be conscious of how I'm communicating, thoughtful about what I'm delivering if I have to do a correction or I want to praise something that could have been a huge progress step for that particular child. Maybe everybody else has mastered getting to the rug without tripping over 7 people. But he did it that day. So I'm going to celebrate that, right? And I'm going to make sure I celebrate it because we are a culture of pale compliments. Nice job. And elaborate, over-the-top criticism. Now, I've told you 6 times that when you come in here, you go to the coat room, you put your book up, then you go put your lunchbox in the bin, and then you come to circle time. No stopping at the blocks. But the pale compliment for that same child when they actually follow our instructions. So thinking about how all of this messaging is disconnecting rather than connecting us to our children. Anyone aware of Gottman's 5 to 1? He did marital, okay, I got a thumbs up back there. He did marital research. And he found out that 5 compliments to every criticism or negative was necessary for a marriage to be maintained. Now that's a pretty intimate relationship. But I think of my relationships with my littles as that same kind of intimacy. I want my classroom to be a space that they feel welcomed in and they want to come to, and they can share with me that struggle or that mess up or that excitement that they've got in their mind. But if all I do is feed them the negative, then I'm disconnecting from them before they even know how to do relationships. They just got to this planet. I got a lot more experience being judgmental and critical and sitting back there and going, well, I should have said this, and if I'd only thought about that, and when he said this, I've done that. So if I'm setting them up straight away with a much more positive approach to the way we interact, even if what they've done was not part of the rules, but I'm finding a way to embrace some sort of piece of that. Sometimes they're called compliment sandwiches. Little guy comes in, hey, we're so glad to see you. Hang your coat up on the rug and then I've saved you a spot. Or hang your coat in the closet and then I've saved you a spot. So the directive is hidden in this wonderful world stuff. Because he may have come from an environment right 5 minutes ago where his sister was getting chewed out because they made her late, made everybody late, we're running late, and now the traffic and the horn and all of that goes on, right? We don't know what they're coming from, but we have the opportunity to make that space more warm and welcoming. I was a slide behind. Here we go. Social and emotional lexicon. He may not know what appreciating compassion and acceptance is, but if I say you were kind to Lorena, you were showing her compassion, kind and compassion now are connected. I'm opening up that vocabulary. It doesn't have to be able to read it, see it, say it, but he's starting to expand on that. I go into classrooms and I ask the kids, how you doing? Am I? Well, culturally, that could be about 10 different things. But I want that child to also be able to express frustrated, exuberated, exasperated. And if we put those words in front of them in a contextual way, then all of a sudden the literature that they're going to read later means I can tell what's going on with that character because I've heard that word before. I felt it when I was feeling this and my teacher confirmed that's what it was. This is a quote from a special ed president. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. Child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. My dad threw me out of the boat and made me swim as he rowed away, but that's another story. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. I have a song in my head. Don't ask me about times 7. I have to do the whole thing to get to 7 times 8 in my head. Oh, did it do that all by itself? But if a child doesn't know how to behave, we do what? Punish. We punish. We tell them they've done something wrong. A mistaken behavior is a mistaken behavior. It's a poor judgment. I know that there are situations where children will intentionally cause harm, but that speaks to me about a whole different level of needs not being met. Most of the time, it's just I didn't know that was what was going to happen. And now I realize that I've upset my family, my kinship that I've got here in my classroom. Or I violated some sort of trust with my teacher. I had a little girl go into my purse one day when I was in the classroom because she was curious that I had changed the screenshot cover on my phone. So she had caught that detail, saw that I had a different picture and was curious. So then we had to talk about boundaries. But it also meant I had to sit down with her on the side and show her the pictures of that vacation so that she could see something a little bit more real. And it wasn't that she violated with the curiosity, it was that we have some appropriate boundaries to operate with. Rather than, you went in my purse, now I gotta write this up, and I gotta take you out of the room, or whatever might happen, if I don't stop and think, why did that, what was the curiosity, what prompted that behavior? So if we're bringing mindfulness into our behavior guidance, again, not classroom management, we're creating a pro-social classroom. Everybody here matters. We get a clean slate every day because this is your space, not mine. I'm a participant in it, but this is your space. Proactively help children help each other and you. I had to stop doing things for my kids and asking them what should we do? Because they actually had more wisdom about it than I did. Putting that truck back together, he knew what he'd taken off first. So where to start in putting things back together? The louder they get, the quieter you get. It's an old school trick, but it still works, right? I've even stood, I think I shared this one with you. I was in a school in Inglewood teaching yoga. The teacher is one of those teachers that she brought the kids to the door and she went running because she had to get to the bathroom and she only had like 11 minutes left of her prep. And the children came in and they were just all over the space. The room was actually too big for the activity we were doing. The yoga mats were in the center and there was all this peripheral space that just invited play. And I was not in a good space. I sat down on the mat and I started chanting Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re So Sanskrit, which I maybe shouldn't have done in a public school, but it's where I went, right? And eyes closed on the mat, I hear this little girl go, y'all done it now, she's calling the Holy Ghost. She helped me more than I possibly could that day. Because I couldn't have connected with them without losing it a little bit further. And she did it in a way that those kids all got down on their mat and they sat and they were like, ready. Be willing to stop instruction. We have a kindergarten teacher in our study down in Washington Park who was having one of those kind of days as well. She went and stood herself in the calm corner and took a deep breath in and out. And when she moved in that way, the kids stopped talking, stopped doing what they were doing, and watched her. And she said, I was going to say something that was either going to hurt you or me, so I needed to come and calm down. So she was vulnerable about her emotional state, but she also stopped what she was doing rather than trying to push through that material that was not going to be received because the space in the room was not ready for it. Addressing behaviors one at a time. We got to break it down. They're overloaded. They don't have the bandwidth they do. We can have 16 tabs on our computer open and still have some sense of control about what's happening. They're not that skilled yet. Even the smartest, most astute that can figure things out beyond only has so much bandwidth to work with. So breaking things down into smaller steps so that we can get through step 1, remedy step 2, come back to step 3 is going to allow us to go slower and process and probably get some more content from them as far as an exchange about what has just happened, positive or negative. Not all stressors that come into our classroom are negative. My birthday is Friday. My birthday is Friday. My birthday is Friday. My birthday is Friday. That's going to make you crazy after Tuesday. Process feelings every day. As a culture, we don't. But to Barnaby's point, if from kinder to 12th grade children are embracing their inner conversations, we're changing the nature of how they're going to interact in their academic, their professional, their interpersonal, their intrapersonal relationships. So we talk about emotions every day. I check in at the beginning of the day. I check in with my teachers. I do PIEs, physical, intellectual, emotional, social. And sometimes they get into all of them because teachers have a lot to process. If you have a capacity in your space to do that kind of a check-in with your teachers, give them a chance to check in every day about their emotions. You'd be surprised what they don't tell us unless they're invited. For peer conflicts, listening and guiding through problem solving, not refereeing. I am not always going to be there between my twins. I reached a point where I said, I'll watch, but I'm not participating. You know right from wrong. You know what you've done. Work on that. Now they come to me and say, well, did you know? And it's about their friends that they've mediated things with online. My son, Ethan, the extrovert, he moderates a female amateur gamers chat room. And he kicks bigots and misogynists out of the space. That had to have been fostered somewhere where he felt comfortable, even in a virtual space, challenging someone and questioning whether or not they belonged in that space. And he protects this young lady in a way that I would have never thought that happened in a virtual space. I'm always curious about these virtual friendships and things. Now I see it's just an experience that I didn't have fostering my socialization. Think understanding, not patience. So yes, patience is an important thing, but more importantly, I need to be able to process what's going on in that child. Slowing them down and saying, be patient with me, may negate their eagerness and their enthusiasm and their excitement to express something that perhaps no other space offered them. If at home I'm taken care of by my grandparent and she can't read very well because her eyes are going and we don't have books, and I come to you and I've got a long story to tell, I may need not patience, but I need to understand that this child has not been listened to over the weekend. And I'm offering them something that is there because they know this space is where they belong. And again, I can be seen and my voice is active here. Did I get to the last one? Oh, rule of proximity. Move closer to the child that's causing you some challenges. Just come on right over. Maybe reach out and touch them. Look at their shoes. Move here. Energy. Exchange that with them. Because we might be tempted to get farther away because I don't want to deal with it. But they may actually just need someone closer to them in that moment. The child that always needs to sit next to me on the rug, what message is that telling me? He needs that connection. That's part of that attachment that he's still working through. Recognize and minimize the influence of problems that lie within the system. If the schedule doesn't work, talk to the administration. If the classroom layout isn't working, talk to your co-teacher. If the drop-off process is causing nothing but chaos, brainstorm a solution. Work with what you're dealing with in a way that honors the fact that we're trying to create a pro-social space even outside of the classroom. Now, I need to completely rewrite this slide and this section based on Barnaby's trickster, sage, and artist, because I think this we can go a little bit deeper in. Somebody does something, and my immediate reaction is, okay, there's a rule, there's a process, this is what we have to do in reaction. What we try to do at Erickson, and this is something that is a deep part of the work that we do with the teachers, is reframing the problem. Considering what's going on in that child that I might not be aware of, and then being mindful in my message back to them. Well, now I want to reframe this. Is this child the trickster, the sage, or the artist? And which one of those hats am I trying to wear when I'm engaging in this response? Because I think that opens up a lot more options. I don't always have to be the sage. Sometimes I can be the artist. That truck that you unpacked, there's some beauty in that, in the ideas that were going on in his head, what he was manipulating in that space. And if I only see it from the fact that as the sage, the rule was broken, the toy is now broken up, I miss the beauty of that child unpacking and doing something that is a skill that we actually need children to be able to embrace as they move forward in life. So with reframing, here's the problem, the challenge, the issue that we're dealing with. This child is very aggressive when he comes into my space. I need to demonstrate empathy. Maybe they're exposed to violence and aggression as a means of power and control outside of school. And that works for the people that are around them, that love them, that provide for all their basic needs. So that may be the way that they think the world operates. I need to be aggressive to have power. I need to be curious about what they're trying to express. You got in my personal space. We all have a realm of where we want folks, and when they get too close, they're too close. And finally, what is the underlying developmental need? With these littles that haven't processed everything that we as adults can unpack completely, what stage might they be moving from that's occurring, and this experience is showing to me that we need to add some play or some other activities in the classroom that will help us get through this particular developmental need, not for this child, but for the community at large, because everybody's watching the way I react to what he's doing. Say, be radical. Would the world end if you didn't respond the way they taught us in academy? Probably not. So we can maybe move off of what has been the script that we've always worked with that particular child, or this particular scenario, or get down with them and tell me more. When we do anti-bias education work and work in that space, and someone says something that's completely unacceptable in that environment, my response to them is, wow, tell me more. And then when I get them to try and unpack that statement that might have been misogynistic or maybe had some gender bias in it, and they have to check their words and come back again, they catch themselves and they expose their own mistake. So if I ask the child to tell me more, they may own the mistake if making mistakes in my classroom is okay, is welcomed. And finally, the first actual words to be used with a child are, the prior two steps are in your head. Okay, so basically, the first thing I say in response may not be verbal. It may be my body language. How many of us realize we give side eye and roll our eyes? Well, we don't do it on purpose. It's one of these unconscious things that happen. My students have taught me, you did it, because we've talked about it. It's part of their culture. It's part of the way that they are reared outside. I work with brown and black children in Chicago public schools. They taught me the term side eye. But once I knew what it was, we were okay to point it out to each other. And when they said, you did it, I went, ooh, yeah, I'm kind of feeling like that right now. Can we talk? And then we pause, and we make that a teachable moment about what just happened. It's human for me to make mistakes. I'm going to tell them when I do. It's okay for them to call me out, because that gives them some voice to potentially advocate for themselves in other spaces as well. So, disrespectful or adultful violence. We have defiance. Kindergartners being suspended and expelled from school. Preschool, right. Defiance, right? He was defiant. Well, yeah, because that's the only language he's got to operate in to tell you that this isn't working for him, that he doesn't feel safe, or he doesn't feel like his needs are being met. So if I reframe it that he's not feeling respected or heard, or is feeling disconnected, that I belong in this space, so I might as well get in trouble and get out of it, right? I could consider whether or not I've established a pattern of not hearing this child. No, I'm not going there. I'm not doing that with him today. I've got these things. I had goals. I've got other stuff I want to do. And then here are some things I could say other than, you're not welcome here, which we never want to say to a child who we're trying to maintain a relationship with. You sound pretty angry. I'm going to take a deep breath. Mirror neurons. I take the deep breath. They take the deep breath. And then we can talk about it, right? Those words don't sound like you. You want to talk about what's upsetting you? Acknowledging that they're having a big feeling, not making that big feeling unwelcome or bad. Because a lot of us have been socialized, myself included, don't get angry. Little boys got nothing to cry about. Little children, there's nothing to stress about. You're not responsible for anything. Well, yeah, they feel all that, and we tell them they don't. But then we want them to be internally aware and regulate at the same time. Finally, since your words are not sounding cooperative, perhaps you want to draw or write about your feelings, offering them an alternative outlet. Because that energy is going to stay in that child. If he's had a cortisol whoosh from that incident, you've got 20 minutes to deal with that. Because it's going to stay in his bloodstream, like it or not. And he cannot neurologically change what's going on because the limbic system activated. Where am I on? Oh, shoot. These are some common behavior challenges. She took my spot. Physical aggression. Add one of your own. What's another common one we deal with?
Call me a name.
Call me a name. Oh, yeah. So just the verbal vomit, right? He looked at me. So reframing. Maybe he was curious about what was going on. Consider that there's something happening there that he's processing upstairs to figure out, how did he do that? Or can I do that next? Or, wow, I'm kind of jealous that he got those 3 puzzle pieces back together because I played with that for 6 days. Right? But slowing down and being more curious about what's happening that's prompting this behavior. All behavior is communication. What are they telling me? Anybody know the book Soda Pop? Push, pull, dangle. Okay. Mindfulness exercise. We're going to stop right here and do this before I move on. Grab the sides of the chair. I got a lot of pent-up energy. Something's just happened, and I'm big like this. I may not be able to leave the classroom, but somatically, I've got to move this stuff inside me. So I'm going to push to the count of 10. I'm going to pull to the count of 10, and then I'm going to take a deep inhale and exhale. So ready? Push. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Pull. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Breathe. We carry tension and tightness in our shoulders. So from a yoga thought, we want to be able to do something with that energy that may not mean running out onto the playground right now, but I need to express this. So I found a contained and safe way that we can get some of that energy moving in the body. And we can do this routinely. Oh, we're about to get on the bus to go on a field trip, and it's going to be chaos. I'm going to push, pull, dangle before we walk out to get rid of some of that excitement. Because that excitement is welcomed. It's something we want children to feel. But we certainly don't want it to get in the way of getting on the bus and then the bus driver hating us for the entire 20-minute drive, right? Okay. How do we explain challenging behaviors? Kids do well if they choose. Who thinks that? No hands. Kids do well if they can. No hands. Kids do well if they try. No hands. Kids do well if they put in enough effort and they're motivated. Which one of these sounds right? B. Kids do well if they can. It's not a choice. If I've got what it takes if what I'm working with is working, I can do it. But if what I've got isn't working, it's not because I'm choosing not to. Even if I'm being defiant, what I'm working with isn't enough for the circumstances. I need more individualist support. I need to be perhaps heard and validated and affirmed that, yeah, I would be angry too. That's a good connecting experience. To have somebody tell me, it's okay to be angry. I would be angry too. Now this is a space that I'm running out of time. But I work in traumatic environments. So most of my schools are in communities that we would shudder at some of kind of the experiences they deal with every day. I enter every classroom, every family engagement event, every teacher PD that I'm going to do, assuming that somebody in that space has been recently traumatized, or their family has been recently traumatized. So I'm going to add that layer of sensitivity regardless of if I've been told that something's happened. I don't want to hear my children's profiles, because that shouldn't be the way I respond to their needs anyway. Their humanity and belonging has nothing to do with what the world has done to them. And very often, if what they've been exposed to has been anger, physical, sexual, environmental, all of those types of things, this is underneath there for the people that projected that onto them. And it's what they're feeling too. And nobody's talking about that. They're just talking about the fact that he came in and knocked over the 6 chairs and ruined the coloring basket and put something in the fish tank and all of that. He's expressing, I don't know what to do, because the people that I'm with aren't showing me any healthy ways to approach what is happening in our space. Toxic stress. Positive is the good stuff. I'm running a marathon, I'm stressing myself out, I got a good goal, right? Tolerable. The mortgage payment is going to be late this week because I had to do this on the car, and I can work through that, it's going to be all right. Toxic. I'm exposed to this every day, it's out of my control, it's normalized in my community. This is the unhealthy stuff. And some of our children have this in their systems epigenetically. If my mom and dad were exposed to trauma, the likelihood that there's a switch on the DNA they gave me is going to be greater. And I'm going to move ahead to get to this one because I want to make sure we talk about this. Barnaby talked about trauma, and we've had some people talk about their ACEs score in some session. ACEs used to be the stuff that happened to me as an individual. Research has moved this a little further. It's also what happens in my environment. And when we think about this, it's very possible that even in an affluent community, you will have a family in that space who has moved out of an environment where they were exposed to some of these, and in many cases, sacrificed some of their own cultural identity in order to get into a new space, and are trying to acclimate and will not tell you their whole story. When my parents divorced, my mother moved us to upstate New York, and everybody asked where your daddy was, and I said, oh, he's building bridges for the government. My mother never told anybody at the school we were going through that that was what prompted us to move. I acted a fool, but no one ever explained to my teacher why. But if we think about the fact that housing or disruption or some of these that for those of us that have white privilege never will experience, to know what this is like, but it is in our classroom, it can be a Ukrainian refugee that has experienced this. This isn't about color, it's often about class. But we want to be sensitive to the fact that when this comes into our classroom, in some cases it comes with some generational trauma and some social and local trauma. And if we consider that every child, every classroom that we're coming into, every teacher that's coming to work with us may be carrying this story, we're going to approach more mindfully how we reframe the interactions, consider what we might be prompting that behavior, and how we mindfully respond to them in a way that satisfies their humanity and their belonging. Okay, we're going to go through here. You know about triggers. They're on my slides. My business cards are up here. You're more than welcome to reach me later. But cognitive load. We all carry stuff. There are people in this room who I have just described that are carrying histories like this. Some of us, it ain't so neat and tidy. Some of us have been able to work through it, gotten appropriate support, maybe been able to get to a healthier relationship that was replaced some of that history, moved away from some of it, but with some healthy practices. But we're still carrying more than we should on a given day. And if I'm over that, I need somebody to go, hey, Adina, I'm going to watch your kids for 10 minutes. You go walk around the block, because I think this is what you need. If I don't have a connection with Christina, for me to know that that's something that's going on, I can't offer that in my community. But if I practice what we've talked about with our kids, with our peers, with our colleagues, then we're creating a space where the children even see the way we interact with the adults in our space in a way that is uniquely affirming what we're offering them to happen in our classrooms as well. Reflective practice is a huge part of Erickson. We do social work on a grand level. This is Gibbs' cycle for anyone that comes out of school social work. The idea is to think about, and this is a mindful practice here. What happened? What was I thinking and feeling? Checking in with those thoughts and emotions that were on that triangle of awareness. Was it a good or bad experience? Now that's kind of binary and it's evaluative, but we're not thinking about good and bad in the context of it being horrible and inappropriate. Like, was it what I wanted? Or was it something that maybe I need to make some improvement on? I could work on Gibbs here. Yeah. What sense can you make of the situation? How can I process this in a way that I can understand this step-by-step, break it down into parts? What else could I have done? And if it happened again, how would I respond differently? And then when Timmy comes back the next week on Monday and does that same thing, maybe I'll approach it differently and go through the same reflective cycle one more time to figure out if I'm actually approaching this in a way that maintains his humanity and belonging, building those connections, and if I'm proud of myself at the end of the day for that exchange. This is not about making ourselves the experts as much as it is making ourselves accessible, because I know myself, when I make a mistake in the classroom, I flog myself for 5 or 6 days. And I'm no good for anybody. Not my children, not my partner, not my students. So if I can do this in a way that's non-judgmental, then I'm creating a better representative of education, a better representative of community, I'm a better democratic citizen, all of those types of things at the end. There's a few more slides here. I'm going to skip over them, and I'm just going to say we've got no minutes left. Does anyone have anything they need to throw out, ask? I like snaps.
Thank you for the handout.
Oh, yes, and here's some business. I didn't get my email on there. Business cards in case you want the actual full thing.
In the beginning, she said she was going to ask all of you.
Beautiful.
If you
Okay,
wanted to
I'm
see
absolutely, but